my daughter was upstairs in her room. We were laughing at something we saw on the TV when I saw something on the stairs. It darted down the steps real fast, picking up at me, and then ducked back down behind the railing, followed by just a cold chill that entered the living room. My mother even commented that it was cold and put her robe together. At first, I thought it was my daughter playing tricks on me, but when she didn't pop up, I honestly felt concerned. So I said, "Mama, did you see something?" Because she had full sight of anything there. She said, "No, dear, I thought that I did, but there's nothing there." That's when it hit me, and instinctively, I just knew what it was and where it even came from. I ran up the stairs and burst into my daughter's room, and I said, "What did you do?" She looked at me with her eyes wide. She knew exactly what I was referring to and started apologizing. I told her, tell me what she did to bring it into this house, and she proceeded to tell me that when her girlfriends were there that they thought it would be fun to try and summon a spirit. Then they tried to reach the father of one of her friends who passed away 2 years prior, but she said something else came through and it scared them, so they stopped and her friends ran home without even saying goodbye. And well, I was furious. I said, "How dare you play with something you don't understand?" I told her that I knew that she was just trying to help her friend, but for heaven's sake, I warned her years ago to never mess around with things that she didn't understand and had no control over. I was thinking that not only do I constantly worry about my family's health now, but I have to worry about this. I asked if she at least closed the door, and she just looked at me with a blank stare, and obviously she didn't. She said that they made a Ouija board out of paper and that when they were done, she just ripped it up and threw it away. I told her that that door had to be closed. So we gathered the pieces and she called her friends. 2 of them were too scared to come back, so we had to perform the closing without them, but in the back of my head, I knew that it didn't work and it was still there hiding somewhere. At that point, there was nothing that I could have done viewing the circumstances at the time. So fast forward to 2016. I had an opportunity waiting for me in Washington State, so I begged and pleaded for my mother and sister to go with me, but my sister Honey was fanatically scared of change, and although my mother desperately wanted to go with me, she just couldn't leave my sister's side. I wish now that I would have been more persistent. So I moved, reluctantly leaving them with my daughter and her now husband to take over their care. And within those 2 years, my elder sister Honey's health severely declined, and my mother shared with me 8 months after I moved that she was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And I flew and drove back and forth to be with them, and every time I showed them pretty pictures of my new life and our beautiful green surroundings, asking them to return with me, and every time, Honey would say that she was just too apprehensive to leave and said no. And in 2018, they both passed away. My mother from cancer and my sister from an existing illness, taking a big part of my heart and my soul with them. My daughter and her husband moved out, leaving all of my mother and sister's things there. Somebody had to put their stuff in storage, and of course it had to be me. And even though I was the youngest of 6, I felt it was my duty. I drove there with my 2 grandchildren, 8 and 4, because at the time there was just no one available to watch them. And when we arrived, the place was just in shambles. Dirty dishes and moldy food lined the counters and was piled up in the sink, and it looked like soot just all over the floor. Mum and Honey's personal belongings were strewn around the house, and in my mother's room, a barricade of trash was piled up all the way to her door. In the middle of the floor in the open space was a full-length mirror that I had never seen before, just hanging off of a wooden ladder. And quite honestly, I just stood there and I cried. I set up a clean spot in the living room for my grandson to play on his tablet with, and my granddaughter wanted to help. As I was bagging things up in the kitchen, I noticed her just standing there staring into the mirror. I didn't think anything of it, but she just kept standing there. Then I heard her say to me while not looking away, "Nana, can you get rid of this mirror?" I thought she wanted to move it, but she was adamant that it had to be taken out of the house. I asked her why she looked so scared, and she told me that while she was looking into the mirror, she was standing there, alone, and she couldn't see anything in the reflection around or behind her. Just darkness all around her, and she felt like something was coming. I looked at the mirror too, not at myself, and I must admit that it did look very dark. It was strange because it really shouldn't have been, but it was. So, say no more. Not only did I take it outside, but I smashed it into a million pieces and threw it in the trash can. But we decided to sleep in the living room, and it took days to even come close to being done. But this happened on the last night, and we were alone. I just mopped downstairs, so I locked the doors and all the windows in the whole house, and we slept upstairs in the bedroom across from my daughter's old room. We hunkered down on some mattresses on the floor, and I always left the light on in the hall. I'm reading a book online. My granddaughter had fallen to sleep next to me, and my grandson was on his tablet at the end of the bed. I was getting sleepy, and my grandson started to yawn. He looked up from his tablet, and his eyes got big, and he ran to the door and shouted, "Spooky," and slammed it, running back to me quickly and got under the covers and got as close to me as he could, making me feel really uneasy. And when I looked, I could see movement in the hall, dimming the light around and under the door, making swirling strange shapes as if someone were pacing, followed by surges of blackness and wisps of cool air coming from the space under the door. And that night was long, and I felt on guard until I finally fell asleep as well, but I woke up hours later and had to go to the bathroom, but I was just too scared. I was just laying there waiting until daybreak, but I just couldn't wait any longer. So I slowly opened the door, fearing for what was waiting for me on the other side, but when I did, there was nothing. But at the same time, I just knew that there was something there. I could feel it. I tried to be as fast as I could, and I left the bathroom door open so that I could hear the kids, and then I ran back. Hearing a swoosh behind me, I slammed the door and laid holding the kids until daybreak. I received a call from my sister later that morning, and she couldn't understand how we would have been able to stay in that house. When I asked her why, she told me that when she was there grabbing some boxes of pictures, she heard noises coming from my daughter's room upstairs. She said that it was loud and she just felt like an evil presence, and everything inside of her just told her to leave, and so she did. She also told me that my son-in-law, for which I had no knowledge of at the time, was practicing some black magic and summoning dark energy in that room, which obviously was not cool. Late that afternoon, when everything was done, the kids were in the car and the car was packed, I just wanted to look at my mother's bedroom one last time where she used to sleep. These walls held just so many memories. I felt like if I looked hard enough too, I would see her laying where the bed had been, and in my mind telling me just not to cry. As I stood there in the doorway, a chill just went up my spine, and the hairs on the back of my neck and my arms started to raise, and I could feel something closing in on me. And then, and I'll never forget this as long as I live, in my ear, I felt a warm breath and heard one loud word, and it said, "Run." And boy, did I run out of that house so fast, not even bothering to lock the door. And, to top it all off, as we were driving off, my granddaughter asked me who that was, standing in the window upstairs. The desert is a scary place for me now. It used to be a place filled with peace and serenity, but since living out there for almost 30 years, you see things. This occurrence took place in the high desert of California in the mid-90s. The whole town was once all military. There's a military plant there and a prison. The streets to this day consist of numbers and letters. An example would be Avenue O with 178th Street. You always heard noises of people missing and underground tunnels, which are confirmed here. In fact, a friend of mine kept getting a draft coming from his closet in his childhood home. And later, after he grew up, he checked it out and found an opening to one of these such tunnels. He actually called me over to check it out, but I was too freaked out to go more than 10 feet in when I turned around and just told him that this might be how people disappeared. You always saw things late at night off in the distance, far past the lights of that then small town. Strange glowing lights that shot straight up, and the things in the sky, just stuff you never talked about, really. But life was carefree back then. If you wanted to visit friends, though, you would have to drive down long desert roads and sometimes end up coming home late at night in the pitch black because there were no streetlights. I remember coming home late one night with my boyfriend at the time and another friend, and we pulled over for some reason. I don't know why, but something just compelled me to get out of the car and look up at the stars. We were in the middle of nowhere, but we could hear what sounded like machinery and muffled clanks, like from metal or something. We all started looking around, but we just didn't see anything. But just then, we felt a vibration under our feet. I crouched down on the street and put my ear to the ground, and it was coming from under us. We all listened intently and heard far down voices, but couldn't make out what was being said. We all stood up and were discussing what it might have been when we saw a small red light on the horizon, and it was getting closer. We piled into the car, and at that point, we just got out of Dodge. But we only told a few friends, and they experienced the same thing, which was weird. A year later, I told a friend that I had started a small hauling business, but there was a big job, so I needed to borrow a trailer. And he said that he had a few that I could use, so I should come out to his property and check them out. It was just starting to get dark when we pulled out this new toy. It was military-grade night vision binoculars, and he told me to wait until it got dark to leave because he wanted to show me something creepy. And I was all in. So later, we walked to the back of his property, looking out at pretty much nothing. No lights, no roads, nothing but barren desert. He pointed the binoculars east, and oh my, there were people out there coming out of the ground and moving around. I said, "What the hell am I looking at?" And he told me that his family called them ground dwellers, and they're located in various parts of the desert. It honestly gave me the heebie-jeebies, and needless to say, I never went to his house after dark again after that. Now, at one point, we were living in a mobile home park past Avenue F. There was a huge treehouse in my yard left by the former renter, and the only way to get up into it was a hole that was cut into the tree with a door on it. Under that was a rope ladder, and one night, I was sitting on the porch just drinking a cup of tea when I heard something move up the treehouse and then a head pop up. It was a lady and her husband hiding. Clearly, I thought that they were on drugs, and I told them to come down from there, but they didn't want to. It wasn't until I threatened to call the authorities did they cautiously comply, looking all around, not wanting to be seen. By now, there was a small group of my friends and nosy neighbors gathered around. I saw that she was terrified by something, though, so I asked them to come in, and I made them something to eat and waited for her to calm down. She pulled out these papers, looked like legal documents with government letterheads or something. Some of them had embossed seals, and they had smoke damage with a few of them even burnt on the edges. She told me that they were checking out this place off of Barrel Springs Road. There were 2 or 3 cinder block structures there, and I knew them well. A few years back, I happened upon that place, and a black truck rushed down to greet me with guns drawn. She said that the same thing happened to her, but she was in one of the structures, so she grabbed some things, and her and her husband just ran. I went over these pages and felt really uneasy reading them, like this was stuff people get killed over if it got out. Stupidly, I said, "Why don't you just simply give them back?" She said that they'd been running, and everywhere they stop, a black car or van with government plates show up and sit there just watching. Well, I really didn't want to get involved with this, especially after reading what I did. It was too big for little old me, and I'll take what I saw to my death, so I packed them a lunch and told them that they could sleep in the treehouse for the night. And they did, but they were gone early the next morning. After that, too, we started seeing black vans parked on our lonely road facing the house. At one point, I was so fed up of seeing them that I just went up to one, but they took off as I knocked on their blacked-out driver's window. Things kept happening out there in the desert, too, but you don't see much now. I think that this is probably because there's more lights and people now. Towns and cameras and phones pointing everywhere, too. But there weren't cell phones back then to call for help and video and whatnot. Anyway, on another day we were having a bit of fun. Some friends and I were in this stupid little red car called a Yugo that seemed to be on its last legs most of the time. And my friend's uncle had told him that there was a whole abandoned town far west from here, and there were things just left there all over the place too. And we were so dumb. It took us a long time to get out there, thinking that we were lost a few times, and then we started seeing some things. A carnival ticket booth on a trailer, broken tractors and furniture, little shacks here and there, and empty water bottles just everywhere. There wasn't a store or place of business for many, many miles. I wondered how anyone could even survive in a place like this, and that was when we saw it. It was long and looked like a single-wide mobile home, if you could ever call it a home, and it was between 60 to 80 feet long, and it was raised. It looked like something from a horror movie, if I'm being honest. It had windows lined all the way down the front of the house, with old frayed curtains still hung up and blowing in the breeze. There were open sections of missing siding under the house, and there were dusty cars with their doors and trunks open cans and trash just all over the place, and a small fire pit in the middle of this. And one of the guys that I was with, his girlfriend and I, we saw people not wearing any clothes inside that house, and they were watching us from the windows and from the open spaces under. They were following us as we were driving the length of the house too, and they almost looked inhuman. They had really big eyes and really pale skin, much too pale for the desert. But he pulled up next to the fire pit, and despite us screaming to go, he turned off the car, and his girlfriend began to cry out that we have to leave right now. He didn't see what we saw, and he said, "Stop, babe, this stuff is cool." Man, I wanted to punch them. We both kept looking at the people watching us while begging him to start the car back up. He picked up a long bone and was moving the spot around and said, "Hey, it looks like somebody cooked a dog." And just then, he looked up as his girlfriend leaned over the driver's seat and grabbed his jacket, and he saw, finally, what we were seeing, and said, "Oh shit," quote, "This thing under the house was just swaying back and forth with its hands on both sides of the opening, just staring at us, almost with intent to lunge." When we all saw this, he tried to start the car, but it failed. Thinking, too, that this was my end, eaten in the desert, I started to beat on the back of his seat, screaming, "Please start this thing." And after 3 tries, it started, and we just tore out of there, leaving a cloud of dust. Eventually, we pulled over far from that location and tried to compose ourselves. We didn't talk about what we saw after that, even in the car trip home, because I think that we were in disbelief that it even happened. There were so many things that occurred in the desert back in the day, too many to even come close to tell you guys, but I do believe that there are things that we just do not understand, or maybe never will understand. Just a tidbit of information too. Rosemond, way back in the day, was a toxic dump site. That's why the houses were so cheap, but if you ask anyone now, they just don't know what you're talking about. This story literally just happened this morning at around 6 a.m. I feel the need to share it too, because it's just been on my mind all day. So, I was leaving for work this morning. I had to be there early, so it was still pitch black outside. And there was not a lot of lighting on my street, so you really can't see anything without headlights or a flashlight of some kind. So I get into my car and drive to the end of my street and come to a stop at the stop sign. And just then I noticed that there was a woman standing on the other side of the street, just standing there. At this point, I probably hang at the stop sign for a couple of seconds because now I'm a little concerned that there's a woman just standing on the side of the street in total darkness. Weird, right? And then she notices me. This is where it starts to get a bit scary too, because she turns to look at me and just out of nowhere starts sprinting full speed at my car. This isn't even like normal running we're talking about as well. Her arms are way out to her sides, and the only way I can really describe it is like a zombie would run in a video game or something. And she was going fast too. All I know is that she was definitely coming straight at me, and she looked like she wanted to hurt me as well. I went into full panic mode. I hit the gas pedal so hard. I must have been going like 60 in a residential area. But at that point, I just did not care. Once I got a little distance away, I looked in the rear view and I can still just barely see her chasing right after my car. And that was the end of the story. She was going fast, but of course she couldn't catch up with my car and I got away. But man, it was a terrifying way to start a day, I tell you. I have no idea who this lady was or what her intentions were or anything. All I know is that it's left some fear in my bones. Two weeks ago, while I was reading on the couch in my living room, I heard a knock on my door of my flat. I wasn't expecting anyone that day, and it's rather unlikely that it was one of my next-door neighbours, since on my floor, we're all students who come and leave after a year or two, and don't really need to meet each other anyway. Mind you, there isn't any peephole on the front door, so I couldn't see who it was either. A few seconds after the knock, though, the voice of a middle-aged man says through the door, "I'm here for the water meter." Now, that was weird. I sent the previous week the water meter reading to the estate agency, so it's still sitting. I shout back to him that I already sent it. There's a few seconds pause before he adds, "I need to see it." I say, "Why do you need to see it?" He pauses again before asking if I can open the door. I get up, start walking to the front door, next to which is the bathroom and the water meter. I tell him that I'm going to read the numbers to him through the door and do so. There's that awkward pause again, and he says, "Thanks," and I expect to hear his footsteps in the corridor while he leaves. I live in an attic room in an 18th century building with old creaky wooden floors and stairs, and thin walls as well, so you can hear people walk or talk on the phone or basically anything, but it just remains silent. At this point, I know that he's just standing right behind my door, and I have an ominous feeling when, after like 30 seconds, I don't hear any steps, and put the bathroom's door wedge under the front door without moving away from the entry. After a minute, I take my phone and I start dialing my mum, and this is the moment where I can hear him leave. I get my mum on the phone and proceed to tell her what just happened. She's even more on guard than her daughter, and decides to send an email to the estate agency from which we rent the flat from, so we can know if it was just a misunderstanding, like the water meter guys were just not warned that the agency got my water meter reading, or was simply late, or something like that. We got their answer a few days later, because they never sent anyone. They went through several options though. It could have been the landlord who came himself, unlikely but possible, or the syndicate of tenants. They then detailed in their email that they called the owner, who was several hundred kilometers away at the time and never sent anyone, which is all to say that the man was never sent by anyone. He managed to get into a building protected by 2 entry codes and directly went to the last door to ask to be left inside a flat rented by a lone female student during one of the few moments of her schedule she's there during the period of the year where tenants give their water meter reading, and didn't ask any other tenants despite the fact that he should have had the list of who communicated it and who didn't. I still don't know how he did it and who he was despite our best efforts. I have that ominous feeling sometimes thinking that I could have naively just let him inside. I probably would have, in fact, if my mother didn't remind me to send my reading, and if I didn't smell that fishy smell, or the fact that he knew exactly what to do and when, and who his target was. I'm moving out soon to another city for my studies, and you can't know just how relieved I actually am. When I was 18, I worked at a local Target. This is when we used to have a wall next to the registers of Pokemon, baseball, collectible cards, etc., and a Starbucks in front of the register by the front doors. For context too, I'm a female. Well, one day, I was filling in this wall with some more cards, and an awkward tall man came up and started looking at the Pokemon section next to me. He asked, "Do you like Pokemon?" And I said yes, which then led to us talking about Pokemon. I didn't think much of it. He picked some, checked out, and then he left. 3 days later, he returned to the store, finds me, and buys me candy and tells me to have a nice day. So, things start escalating at this point. He would come in frequently, just looking for me, started sitting at the Starbucks tables and watching me while I work, which then eventually he started buying me more candy, Starbucks drinks, flowers, and then little girl panties, pacifiers, little girl hair accessories, which, of course, I'm freaked out now. I tried telling my bosses, but they couldn't really do anything about it. Called the cops, and they couldn't do anything either. He actually followed me to the back room one day since I started leaving the registers whenever he came into the store. And that was when we were able to call the cops because he cornered me in the back room. But thankfully, our stockroom guys were back there to basically save me. We were able to get a restraining order on him for the store so he couldn't enter anymore, but that's when he started waiting outside for me, following me to my car and leaving love notes on my vehicle for me to come out to. Honestly, it was terrifying, and my mum knew too, but again, we just couldn't do much. One day, though, he actually followed me from my work to my mother's house where I lived at the time. I'd never seen his car until this day, and stood outside the house, singing love songs and reading poems to me, really loudly too, and my mother called the cops. We kept telling him to leave, and when the cops got there, they finally were able to get him to go away, but now he left me notes in my house, sent me letters and packages with porn, sexy outfits, girly panties, baby stuff, etc. During all of this too, my mum and I were trying to get a restraining order on him ourselves and charge him for harassment. But it's not like it stopped him. Finally though, one night, I was coming home from work and he waited around the corner of the house and he actually attacked me. He grabbed me around my face and dragged me to the ground. I screamed so loud and so much that, luckily, I had neighbors come outside and help me. He was arrested at that point, and I had enough evidence saved up to be able to take him to court, and now he's been in jail for 8 years. But he's due to be released in 2021. He's actually in the Jester 4 unit. He was stalking another local girl that I connected with so we could help each other out after he got sent away, that is. She was just starting to get his attention, so luckily she never got hurt, like I did. So, this is still an active situation that we're trying to figure out how to deal with. It's going to be a bit of a long one, but the details are needed to give you an idea of just how crazy this whole thing is. So, I'm 29, female, switched up my career in healthcare to follow my dream of learning how to work on cars. I was hired this past May at a dealership as a quick service mechanic, and fell in love immediately with everything about it, and my co-workers. I had noticed how cute my trainer was, and not only was he cute, but he was very patient with training me too. I was so new to working on cars that I needed to learn the basics, and he was really helpful and nice about everything. His name was Nick, and he was 40 and male. Me and Nick had actually hit it off in every way as well. He asked me on the first date to go geocaching, which was great, because I love that stuff, and Nick and I have been side by side since then. I always really loved everyone I worked with, always laughing and playing pranks on each other, but also always helping each other and busting our asses to make the customers happy. I should add too that my best friend works there as well, and another good friend of ours had gotten hired too. We were a close-knit family in the quick service department. And well, I didn't make it past my probationary period because I was just a bit slower. So Nick has a full mechanic garage at his dad's place, and I'd meet him after he got off work so we could make some side job money. About a month and a half ago, Nick and I decided to get an apartment together, and it's been amazing. I've been bringing him to work, grabbing him on lunch breaks, and picking him up, which I love because I can also say hey to all of my old co-workers. That being said, I should add that Nick doesn't have any social media, and we are together literally all the time, except for when he's working, obviously. But here's where things get crazy. So, I got a message request on Facebook from some random girl saying, "I can't believe what I'm seeing. Nick is my man, and he's in your profile photo with you, and he's been my man for 7 months." I immediately went into panic mode, called him at work asking who this girl is, and he was honestly just as confused. The more I talked to this girl, though, to try and figure out what the hell is going on, the more she said weirdly specific things about Nick, like the truck that he drives. They meet up at his dad's shop, which no one would know about his dad's shop because he never talks about it. She knew his phone number and pretty much everything. But she could never provide proof, screenshot conversations, photos of the two of them, nothing. We got to the point, though, where it felt like this thing was real and that her and I were going to team up. But she just never answered my calls, only messages. But after Nick and I had a huge talk about it, I knew that something wasn't right about this girl, and I just had to get to the bottom of it. But I started getting pretty scared one day when I dropped Nick off after lunch. A minute went by and I got a message saying, "Damn, Nick looks sexy in that hoodie today." And this really shook me up. I asked what color, and she said the correct color, and at this point, my first thought is, stalker is like actually watching us. I told Nick about how she knew what he was wearing, and he was super creeped out. Then, when I pick him up, I'll usually park by the quiet side of the building where no one can really see me. This time, though, a work truck drives by me really slowly. I pretend not to notice him because I was in no mood to chat with anyone, and I recognized the driver as a former co-worker of mine that I'd only spoken to maybe 2 times during my time at the dealership. However, we were friends on Facebook, and within a minute of him passing me by, the girlfriend messages me saying, "You're waiting for Nick on the side of the building right now." And in that moment, I started to freak out. This dude is pretending to be my boyfriend's girlfriend. Then, after talking to Nick about it, we find out that, yeah, he's the only one from work that knows that Nick's dad had a shop. Nick had worked on this guy's truck before. They aren't friends, but they chat here and there, and, well, not anymore, but I just don't know why. He was saying such gross things to me as he was pretending to be my boyfriend's girlfriend. And if he's capable of doing this, who knows what else he's capable of? He's also a giant dude in his 40s with children of his own. I have no actual proof, of course, other than the fact that any Tinder this girl was active on, so was he. I see this dude every day too, and Nick still works with him. He's in a different department than Nick, thank God, but still. So yeah, I'm still not sure what to do about any of this. This happened when I was about 23, female, and living on a quiet street of a busy road. It was a good neighborhood, and I never really felt unsafe. Well, except this night. So, I was walking home at about 11:30, and there were still people about when I passed the Tesco Express, round the corner from my flat. As I walked past, a man came out, and I noticed him stop, but didn't think much of it. I continued up and around the corner onto my road, which seemed deserted. I had my headphones in, silly I know, but I noticed someone behind me. I glanced back and noticed a man with Tesco bags, but he didn't worry me yet. Now, before I continue though, I have to explain the layout of my flat. We, my parents and I, had the 2 bottom floors, ground and lower ground. Our bedrooms were on the ground floor by the front door, and the kitchen and the bathroom, living room and the dining room were on the lower ground floor. The front door was also on the side of the building, so you're perpendicular to the street when going inside. So I get to my front door and something catches the corner of my eye. I look to my right, to the street, and Tesco man is just standing there, staring at me. He was standing in front of a street lamp, so his face was dark. I quickly got myself inside though, and I dropped my bag in my bedroom and heard soft knocks coming from the front door. I could see the front door from my room, so I crouched low and quietly locked the front door from the inside, hoping that he didn't hear or see me. But he just kept knocking softly. I slipped downstairs when my parents were watching TV. I was freaked out, but embarrassed, so didn't mention it. I figured that he would give up soon and just go away. I sat in the living room with my parents, but being closest to the door, I could still just hear him knocking, and my parents didn't hear it right away. Eventually, I went to get some water from the kitchen. When I came back out, my mum was at the foot of the stairs. She said, "Hey, I think somebody's knocking on our door." The jig was up. "Hey, Mum, I was too embarrassed to tell you, but some guy followed me home, and I think that's him at the door." "What? Why didn't you say anything?" We went upstairs and kind of stood by the front door. My dad came up and asked if everything was okay, and I quickly called him up. My mum called first. "Hello?" On the other side of the door came, "You alright?" I think he thought that was me speaking through the door, so my dad, in his sternest voice, said, "Can I help you?" "Nah, you're alright," came back. "Listen, you need to leave before I call the police." I don't remember exactly what Tesco man said then, and it was some vague threat, but it was also obvious that he was leaving. After a few moments, we went outside to make sure that he was gone, and there was no sign of him. But because he knew where I lived, I was worried for quite some time that he would come back. Thankfully, we moved a year later, although I always loved that flat, so it was a shame. Around May of 2013, me and 3 friends from university were taking a gap year and decided to go travelling around North America. We're from the northwest of England. Up until this incident, we were in the US for maybe 4 months, but we left within a few days of this happening and just returned home. So our trip was what you would expect of 3 20-year-old students. Lots of partying, drinking and drugs. We were relatively sensible, though, amidst all of this, and never really done anything people would consider crazy or irresponsible. But we were renting a small flat and had about 5 or 6 usual spots that we would go to where we would meet people, mostly women, and we would get drunk and hopefully try and get lucky. But one particular day, we'd been to the local supermarket to get some food and things for the flat. We took a cab and the driver seemed really friendly and we just got talking. And he told us about a pretty good place to go and drink and filled our heads with the usual full of hot women, cheap drinks, etc., etc. The driver even told us that he'd be going himself tonight and we should consider coming too, and we could have a drink together. He was really interested in the English Premier League and wanted to pretty much talk about it because nobody there was into it at the time. So we arranged to meet him there around 9:30. He wrote the address on any piece of paper and said that any taxi driver will know where to take us. So we get ready, like any usual night. We hail a taxi, and when we hand him the note, the first red flag, he looks back at the 3 of us and asks us if we know what this place is. We tell him about the other cab driver, and he basically warns us that it's an invite-only sort of place, and apparently things get a little weird in there. We decide to go anyway, but he also warns us that this is going to be a pretty expensive fare, as it's maybe a 35-minute drive. I remember having second thoughts at this moment, but my friends just wouldn't be swayed, so off we went. We arrive a short time later, and the place can only be described as just a derelict-looking building, just on the edges of what seemed like an industrial estate. Pretty creepy looking back at it. We got out of the taxi, paid the fare, and head toward the building. There was a main door, but it was a huge double-fronted steel door, so we knocked, only for there to be no answer. We walked around the building and found a few guys having a smoke outside. We told them that we'd been invited by a cab driver and described him. They knew who we were talking about and told us to just wait outside while they fetched him. But note also that these people were not welcoming or polite. They actually were pretty strange and seemed like they were trying to intimidate us. The taxi guy comes out and he isn't happy as earlier in the day, but seems friendly enough, and we go inside with him. This place was pretty dimly lit, with the sound of music coming from below. It sort of sounded like it was underwater almost. He told us to wait while we went into a room, and he came out with a stamp and stamped our hands. I remember the stamp was an orange circle with an X in the middle. We didn't think much of it. Just a small detail that I remember, though. He tells us to follow him, and as he promised, there was a pretty large area full of people dancing and seemingly having a good time. But something about it just seemed really off. It was as if it was either scripted or all of these people were just really tripping. It turned out to be the latter as well. But we started drinking and making small talk with people who were either too messed up to converse or just didn't seem interested in talking with us, so we made our own fun, started drinking a lot, and tried to source some drugs. We found the taxi guy, and he told us to give him some money and he'd bring us back some good stuff. So we did. He stuck to his word too, and about 30 minutes later, we were pretty messed up, but still enjoying ourselves. But right here is where the night takes a turn. A guy approaches us in a long jacket and asks us some questions. Where are you guys from? Are we armed? And some others that I can't remember. Pretty weird, but we just brushed it off. A few more guys who were his friends started talking with us, and after a while we agreed that we would go back to their place for a sort of after-party thing. And this was literally the worst mistake of my life. We get in the truck with these guys, and there was a few more following us. Seemed pretty normal at this point, until we realized that nobody else in the truck was talking except for us, and there was also no music. It was kind of awkward and a little bit concerning, and I started to panic a little at this point, and I suggested that maybe we should just get out because we didn't know where we were and we should be getting back. My two friends didn't argue too, but the guy driving the truck just completely ignored us. Eventually, though, we get back to this sort of studio apartment with 2 floors. It was very open plan except for a few chairs and some weird random art pictures propped up on wooden mounts. Again, no music, kind of weird, and at this point, I basically said to my friends something like, let's just slip out for a ciggy and we'll all just leave. But they wouldn't let us leave, basically telling us to have a good time and chill out till the others arrive. We were obviously pretty worried, and even though we hadn't been threatened or anything, something just seemed really off, until one of the guys, who had not said a word the whole drive, came and sat near us and plainly asks my friend, while taking a hold of his wrist, how much would I have to pay to watch you slit your wrist? We really didn't know what to say, and I tried to awkwardly just laugh it off. At this point, the drug and alcohol effects were wearing off, and I realized what a bad situation this is. So I stand up and say that we really need to leave because we're busy the next day, only to be told that we have to stay for a while. It wasn't an order as such, but it may as well have been. We flat out don't drink anything at this point, and we can't even talk amongst ourselves because the guy who asked about my friend's wrist is basically sitting right in between us. The taxi guy is nowhere to be seen, and another group of people arrived, and they were dressed really strange. To us at least. Long coats, huge boots, fingerless gloves. Usually something that we honestly would have laughed about, but in this situation, it just wasn't funny at all. After the new group conversed with the old group, they literally all walk to the part of the room where we're sitting in and ask us if we have any family in the country with us because they know that we're visiting. I think pretty quickly and say, yes, I gave my brother and his friends the address of the place that we went to initially, and they'll be worrying. He flat out calls me a liar, and we're all pretty terrified now. One of my friends was asking what they were doing with us and why they wouldn't let us leave. And after maybe another 2 hours of sitting on this couch, and the other groups of the people standing in little groups and turning and shooting us looks every now and again, I get up and ask what time it is and I need to be going. I basically get told to sit back down and I don't need to be worrying about the time. Enter taxi guy. He comes into the room and straight away we make eye contact. He mouthed something to me, but I couldn't make it out, but I knew that whatever it wasn't good. I stand up and walk toward him. He meets me halfway and tells me that he isn't allowed to be talking to me and that he's sorry. At this point, I'm actually considering that we may die in this place in some sort of crazy horror movie style cult killing. I return to my friends and tell them that I think they'll do something really bad if we don't find a way to leave. I remember the studio wasn't very high up in the building, maybe 1 or 2 flights of stairs, and that the main door wasn't open when we arrived. One of my friends stood up and basically said something along the lines of, "Look, whatever you're going to do, either do it now or just let us leave." And literally, everybody except us and the taxi guy started laughing hysterically. Fear started turning pretty quickly to anger, and I basically said to my friends, "Screw this, let's just walk past them." As we approach the door, one guy pretty much stands and blocks the door, In my head, I thought if I shove him, open the door and run, maybe we'll get out. But basically, before I got the chance, the whole group started beating us up, spitting, kicking, pretty much everything, and I remember the taxi guy just trying to drag guys off of us, but that was it. After they beat us up, I remember being dragged back down the same stairs as we'd brought in, and I also remember seeing my friends being dragged behind me as I was facing the opposite way. It was light outside now, and I see the main door. We were urinated on when we got outside and had petrol poured on us as well. I honestly, too, thought that I was about to be burned alive, and I was just sobbing. My friends the same. The whole ordeal ended a few minutes later, and the guys got into the same two trucks, and they left, and we were bloody and covered in piss and petrol and terrified in the middle of practically nowhere. We basically ran the first chance that we got when the guys drove away in the truck. It took us about 2 hours of walking until we came across a petrol station. The man working there was horrified and called the police, who arrived relatively quickly. He asked us if we could remember where this happened, and we no longer had the piece of paper with the address to the place on it, and none of us could remember the name. We were still pretty shook, but we managed to direct them back to the building where we were locked in, still covered in piss and petrol, mind you. None of the injuries we got from being beat up were too bad, just some bruises and a couple of cuts. We told the story maybe 5 or 6 times all in, and were later informed of some other tourists who reported something very similar. The building that we were in was used for art shows or something, and the locks to the studio that we were in had been smashed off. This whole ordeal basically sparked agoraphobia within me, and after returning to the UK a few days later, it probably ruined the best part of my 20s, and still to this day traumatizes me. But having a son and a family and such has helped me greatly. Whether it was a gang of lunatics just trying to terrify us, or whether they had other plans for us, but something happened, I don't know. But it was definitely the most terrifying time of my life. One of my 2 friends also had to seek counseling for this, and the other basically just won't talk about it. Just to add as well, we all did have phones, but when we were brought into the apartment, we were asked nicely to leave our phones in the truck, as no one used phones because it would ruin the night, because people would be antisocial. We were gullible and we agreed, and that was really stupid. This happened in the year 2000. I was 21, living with my best friend in a 2-bedroom apartment in a pretty rundown area. Fortunately, there was no crime, as it was all 2 broke kids just getting started could afford. I spent my days juggling classes at the local community college and just working retail. I was single at the time and would often spend my time online all night just on chat rooms and Usenet. I had met this girl too in a local area chat room, and we'd been hitting it off. Or so it seemed. I'd email her and we'd chat on ICQ. She had sent me a few pictures and I was really into her. She was pretty with a thick curvy body, which was pretty much my type. Her name was Beth, and she had told me Beth by Kiss was her favourite song. So, this one rainy night in February, we were talking and she had asked me to come over. She lived a few towns over, maybe an hour away. Like I said earlier, we were hitting it off, and honestly, I found myself liking Beth a lot. And so, I jumped at the chance to actually meet her in person. We made plans for me to pick her up and go to the Waffle House. I showered and got dressed, nothing too fancy. One of those long-sleeve shirts with the stripe across the chest, jeans, hoodie. I didn't want to overdo it, but still looked decent. By the time that I left, it was almost 11, and my roommate was asleep in his room. I headed out, excited and kind of nervous. In hindsight, though, I really should have just stayed home. It took a lot longer to get there than I thought it would, probably thanks to the rain, but sure enough, her directions took me right to her place. It was a double-wide trailer in a rural area trailer park. I walked up the stairs of the front porch and I knocked on the door. I've always been pretty shy when talking to girls that I liked, and I was still nervous when she opened the door. The door opened just a little, and a little voice told me to come in. I walked in, apologizing for taking so long in a little bit of a nervous daze. She said that it was okay and to have a seat, so I sat on the couch, and then, for the first time as I looked up and at her, I noticed that That was not Beth. This much older woman, maybe in her 40s, wearing only a bathrobe, sat down across from me. Now, I don't want to body shame, but I need to point out that she was huge. I'm a big guy, over 6 foot with a big hoss-type body, and she was much bigger than me. I'm a big guy, over 6 foot with a big hoss-type body, and she was much bigger than me. I glanced around trying to figure out what was going on. I saw pictures of the Beth that I knew on the wall, the same pictures that I'd seen during ICQ. And hey, who's that guy in the pictures with this older woman? I looked back at her and instantly noticed that she was staring at the clock nervously. I asked what was going on, and she started mumbling nervously. Actually, imagine a child telling you what they'd done when in trouble. That's how she was talking, like a child caught red-handed. I pieced together that she used the other pictures of a girl around my age. I'm assuming the girl was a niece or something. And in her mumbling, she said that it was later than she realized and he'd be home soon. My mind instantly raced to a friend telling me that his uncle caught his wife using pictures of their daughter to lure younger guys over for anonymous sex. I quickly realized, too, that the guy in the pictures was her husband, and I was in that very same situation. I fully respect others' relationships, and at this point, I was instantly ready to go. I was no longer nervous, and I just told her straight up that I wasn't going to mess around with a married woman. I told her to no longer contact me and that I was leaving. I was pretty pissed. I mean, not only had I been lied to, but I'd been cheated on before, and I know exactly what that felt like, and refused to have a part in doing that to another person. As I walked out the door onto the porch, she yelled, "Wait." I turned around instinctively to see her coming towards me, and she grabbed me and started trying to kiss me. I pushed her away and I told her to stop, and then her face just turned into a mask of pure insanity. She rushed towards me once again, trying to kiss me. I tried to hold her back, but in a second, she tackled me, knocking me over with her falling on top of me. She kept grabbing at me, grabbing at my private parts, kissing me and crying like a baby. She kept screaming for me to do her, and I was trying to push her off, but the fall had knocked the wind out of me. Not to mention, like I said, she was huge. I kept wrestling with her, trying my best, and somehow worked my legs in between us. I pushed them up as hard as I could, knocking her off me, and she stumbled up and fell over on her porch furniture. Adrenaline took over, and I just ran as fast as I could down the stairs and straight to my car. As I was sliding into my seat, I saw her picking herself up at the bottom of the stairs. She must have fallen down them trying to get me still, and I backed down the driveway, and as I looked back before driving away, she was coming down the driveway too. Her bathrobe was hanging half off of her, her naked body was exposed and covered with scratches and dirt from her falls and whatnot. I just drove off as fast as my Ford Escort would take me. To this day, I still don't know how I didn't get into a wreck from constantly looking in the rearview mirror, hoping that she wasn't following me. But I found my way back to the main road and before long realized that I had went the wrong way. I pulled into the first gas station intending to turn around. I noticed that nobody was following me and the gas station was well lit and had a few cars in it. I felt safe and so I parked, trying to get myself together after that insane scuffle. And honestly, I still find it hard to believe just how scared I was. If you would have seen that face and been through that tackle, you'd understand. But I collected myself and I got out of the car to use the bathroom and make sure that I wasn't hurt. The adrenaline was wearing off and random pain started creeping in, and it was then that I noticed that the gas station was uphill, overlooking that trailer park. I could still see her standing at the bottom of the driveway, and it looked like she was holding her head just crying. At first, I kind of felt bad for her. I mean, I'm a nice person to a fault. I've often let myself get sucked into bad situations by feeling bad for a person that I shouldn't have. And I saw this crazy person crying, and I just felt bad. But then I remembered all of her crazy stuff and the pain creeping in, making me wonder if she seriously hurt me. So I used the bathroom and I left. As I was getting back in my car, I looked back one more time and I saw a car in the driveway and a man was yelling in the front yard. I guess that he must have got home while I was peeing. I can't imagine what it would be like coming home to your wife standing naked in the driveway just crying like that. Judging by her mumbling before the insanity, I figured that she wasn't a good liar either. I got home the next day and told my roommate what happened. I didn't want to at first. I felt ashamed for some reason. Though, like I said, he was my best friend and he knew immediately when something was wrong. Not to mention that I was limping around anyway, and my entire body was killing me. And he figured that she was just unhappy in her marriage and maybe her screwing around made her a little crazy. Or maybe she already was crazy and the situation just set her off. Maybe she was on drugs or something. I don't know, but I cut off all contact and it's been almost 20 years since that night. I've never seen or heard from Beth again, and I'm 41 now and I'm happily married. My best friend is still my best friend, even though he no longer lives in the state. We never really talk about it though. Outside of this, I've only talked about it to a therapist that I visited during a particular hard time in my life as well. My wife doesn't know, and I still feel pretty ashamed about it. The therapist told me that it was probably a form of a little bit of PTSD type thing or something. Not to mention the guilt from perceived gender roles, maybe, but who knows. In the end, I got away, and I'm thankful for that, but it certainly could have gone a whole lot different. So before I start retelling this particular experience, I want to preface it by giving my reason for sharing it. So, this happened some years back, and I've always been quick to just kind of push it off and try to forget about it, but a conversation that I had recently inspired me to write my story out so people with more experience of the paranormal or supernatural phenomena might tell me what I witnessed, if anything. This all takes place in northwestern Montana during the late autumn of 2009. When I was 17, I moved out of my parents and in with a co-worker, who I'll call John, in his trailer. We got along well at work, and we'd been part of the same weekly D&D group for a while. It was actually one of the better roommate situations I've ever had in terms of compatibility, and we became close friends during this time as well. We were roommates until shortly after I turned 18, and some personal stuff happened with my family, and I ended up moving back in with them for a while at least, so I could help them cover some bills. It took about 3 months for that situation to stabilize, and I called this friend up about moving back out there. And this was the first time I remember feeling like something was off, though it's been so long that I can't remember the details of the conversation. Just a sense of wrongness that lingered for a while after I'd hung up the phone. The end result, though, was that I was welcome to move back in, which I expected. I waited for a day off, and another friend, who I'll call Dave, came to help me move. Dave was another D&D pal from a different group, and we were figuring that we'd show up and talk John into a one-shot session or something. So we loaded up all my stuff, and we drove out there, and it was such a nightmare. But from the very moment that John opened that door, everything was just wrong. I won't say John was a clean freak, but he tried to maintain his space, and he'd always insisted that we clean up for company when I was living with him. And I stood there, open-mouthed, to see the thick layer of dust that just coated nearly everything. And the longer I looked around, the worse it got. And there was a half-eaten plate of food turned to mold just sitting on the table. Both sinks in the kitchen were similarly moldy, and the air in the trailer just stank, even beyond what I'd expect for some moldy dishes. I was extremely taken aback by the state of the trailer, but the state of my friend was even more shocking. He worked at a bank, and he'd always kept himself clean, but now he just looked like a complete wreck. He'd lost weight, his skin had unhealthy waxy looks to it, his hair was overgrown and greasy, and his body odor was just terrible. His smell was the first thing that made me think that there's something really off about this situation. I'd been playing D&D and doing other nerd stuff for a long time, and I'm sorry to say that a lot of nerds don't have the best hygiene practices, but short story is that I've been in the presence of some pretty pungent body odor in my life, and this was not like that. It was almost the sickly sweet smell of something dead, but not quite. I've never really smelled anything exactly like it before, or even since. At this point, during the encounter, I'm at a general level of unease, and I didn't have any desire to go into the trailer. But John invites us, and not wanting to be rude, I go in. At this point, I'm thinking that something crazy happened while I was away. John wasn't dating anyone, so I'd figured that this was a depression resulting from heartbreak or something, and we kept in touch okay after I first moved out. And even when that fell off a bit, I still heard from our mutual friends about the D&D sessions that he was attending, so this was all just really weird. Regardless, though, despite having not heard anything about it, obviously something had happened. So, standing there in this dusty living room with Dave, who is shooting me sideways looks the entire time, I ask John if everything is alright. After a full 3 seconds of silence, he assures me that everything is fine, just that he doesn't try to explain the state of his house or anything, and weirder yet, he goes, "You guys can crash out here," and just heads off to the back of the house. I'd always known him to be a diligent host, so this was odd to say the least. Although basically nothing was going as I expected or remembered up to this point, him ditching us in the living room of his nasty house was probably the least weird thing. And now comes the part where I'm pretty glad that Dave was there. To me, this nasty trailer was my home. I'd lived there for more than a year before my 3-month visit to my parents, and I had a sense of belonging in the place, which I think made me oblivious to things that were obvious to Dave. Despite the state of things and being left alone by my friend, I hadn't made any changes to the plan of living there. I'd set my stuff down and started getting ready to do some cleaning, but Dave stopped me and started pointing out things that I hadn't noticed up to this point. The layer of dust was even and undisturbed across the entire living room and kitchen area, except for the thin track from the front door to the hallway leading to the back of the trailer. Whispering to me, Dave says, "Nothing in here has been used for a long time." And, really looking around, I begin to realize that he's right. The TV, the computer, the couch and the chairs, the dining table with its rotten food, he hasn't so much as laid a hand on any of it for a month or possibly longer. Dave, almost as if he's sneaking, walks quietly into the kitchen to inspect the fridge. He points out a few thick patches of dust on the flatter surfaces of the fridge, but it's harder to tell here. The fridge's metal handle did have some dust, but it wasn't collected. Stepping past Dave, I reach out with one finger and I pop the fridge open. Man was gagging before I'd even opened the door enough to trigger the interior light. Throwing my arm across my face and burying my nose in the crook of my elbow, I open the fridge about halfway and it's just top to bottom with rotten food. I step back after a second, turning away and trying to suppress my urge to vomit. After I take a moment to collect myself, Dave draws my attention to a half-gallon of milk that he pulled out of the fridge, indicating that it had expired 3 weeks prior. Personally, I just wanted him to put everything back and close the fridge, more or less done playing dust detective. I basically shrug off everything up to this point, clear some dust from the couch and get my laptop out and connect to the Wi-Fi. We'd always paid for the best internet available, but after a while Dave joins me and we played World of Warcraft for a bit. Eventually he tells me that he'll hang out for tonight because I'm his ride and taking him back to his place and driving back to the trailer was a 90-minute round trip. To be clear, I would have taken him home anyway. I wouldn't blame anyone for wanting to hang out in a room with a giant stack of mouldy dishes in the sink and a fridge full of rotten food. But we played games on the computer for the next few hours and John just never made a noise. At one point, Dave asked me where the bathroom was and I told him that it was at the far end of the hallway next to John's bedroom. A low level of unease had been present since John first answered the door and was becoming more apparent the longer that we stayed. Normally, I don't walk with my friends to the bathroom, but it seemed like the right thing to do at the time. So I led Dave down the hallway, flipping on the hallway light as we go and covering my fingers in the dust from the switch. At this point, I must admit that I was actually starting to get annoyed with everything. I don't normally have bad seasonal allergies, but all the dust that we'd been stirring up had my nose itchy and half plugged. So, on my way back down the hallway, I think to myself that I'm going to point Dave into the bathroom and knock on John's bedroom door and confront him about the condition of the house. But halfway down the hallway, I realize that there's a hole in the floor outside the bathroom door. A jagged edge hole through which You can clearly see the dirt and the cobwebs and shredded black plastic that used to cover insulation. I sigh, exasperated now with the weirdness. I point Dave into the bathroom and I walk to the end of the hallway where John's room is. I wonder briefly if he's actually asleep, as there's no light coming from under his door. The sun was setting, but it's getting dark pretty early this time of year. Annoyed, I knocked loudly, and after a few seconds, I heard a grunt from inside the room. I pop the door open and flip on the light, and this is the point in time where it really starts to sink in for me how wrong this experience felt. I take in the room at a glance, and it's much the same state as the rest of the house. Dust everywhere except for the track from the door to the nearest side of the bed. The bed itself was terrible. The blankets and pillows were stained a deep yellow, almost black in places, and John just laid on his bed with a 1,000-yard stare turned on the ceiling. I instantly forget entirely why I even came to talk to John, because looking directly at him, I felt the beginnings of what I can only describe as a profound fear, which even at the time seemed like an odd feeling to have in that situation. My sickly-looking, clearly depressed friend, laying on his disgusting bed, paying no attention to me at all. I mean, it was weird that I felt so scared. John was not an intimidating guy, short, kind of chubby and baby-faced, but in my gut, I was just terrified of him. I mumbled something about how I'd come to say goodnight, and turned off the light, and I shut the door. I turned around to find Dave kneeling by the hole in the floor, which, as I write this, makes me wonder how long I stood in the doorway to John's room for. If I had to estimate from where I left Dave to saying goodnight to John, only 15 seconds or so elapsed, but he was already out of the bathroom, which was weird. As I approached, Dave points at the edge of the hole and tells me the wood along the edge is twisted upward, as if the hole was made from below. This part I wish I could confirm to be true. I'm including it in my retelling of events because Dave did say it to me, but I did not take the time to inspect the edge of the hole myself. Because right then, I was just at war with my own sense of fear that being in John's presence had sparked. I just nodded to Dave and I said, we should get back to the living room. Fast forwarding a bit now, I kind of came to my senses once we were back in the living room area and I had reopened my laptop. My sudden intense fear of John eased off, and we played a few games for a few more hours before Dave said that he wanted to rest his eyes. We shut everything down, I chilled out in a recliner, and Dave laid down on the couch, positioned so that he could look down the hallway. I was just too uneasy to sleep over all that night, and after looking into John's room, I had determined that I wouldn't be living here after all. As much as I didn't really like living with my parents anymore, it was preferable to whatever John had going on here. Quietly, I told Dave that everything was just all wrong, and explained a bit how John as I knew him would never let anything get to this point. We weighed out the possibilities, a psychotic break or maybe drugs. It occurred to me more recently that I should have considered the fact that he might have been seriously ill even. These are all still possible explanations to this strange behavior, but my gut tells me that none of these are the answer. After a while, we lapse into silence, and at this point, I'm just waiting for the sun to come up, really starting to wonder why we haven't left already when Dave motions with his hand to get my attention. He kind of points towards the hallway, and I turn my head slowly in the recliner to look, and after perhaps 15 or so seconds of just staring hard into the darkened hallway, I hear a slight creak from the darkness. A little while, and a few creaks later, I see John's darkened silhouette just standing, just inside the hallway at the edge of the kitchen, and that deep sense of fear just started to build in me again. The only thing I can compare it to is once, when out hiking alone, I ran right into a fairly decent-sized bear going the opposite way on the trail. I had bear spray on me, which I didn't end up using at the time, but it was a terrifying experience, and if I'm being honest, I've never really enjoyed hiking much since then. Just standing across from that monster of a bear with nothing between us awakened a terror in me so deep-seated that recalling the memory still gives me goosebumps. Alternatively, I've been face to face with a lot of crazy people and felt no such terror before. I wasn't fearless when trying to avoid a knife-wielding transient shouting gibberish at me, but It was a human threat, if that makes sense. I realize that I've segued pretty hard from my retelling of events, but I feel making this clear is paramount, because seeing John just lurking in the darkness of that hallway inspired in me a state of fear so powerful that I feel I have no choice but to look for unconventional answers as to what happened to my friend. Because the only thing comparable to that gut feeling of dread that my short, chubby, baby-faced friend created in me was the time that I ran into one of the largest terrestrial predators on the planet, by myself, on his home turf, far and away from any help, armed with nothing but a can of bear spray. There was something wrong and dangerous going on that I can't justify analytically, but my instincts told me that I was in danger in a way that I'd never been prepared for. But to fast forward to the end of this story, we lay there in silence while he lurked in the hallway for hours. When I questioned Dave recently, he tells me that it was at least 2 hours that John just stood there, allegedly just staring right at us. Eventually, he crept back down the hallway to his bedroom, and quietly and quickly, we just got our stuff together and we snuck out to my car and we left. I did a little bit of a follow-up with our mutual friends afterwards, but got the same story from all of them. One day he just stopped coming around, and later I heard from someone who spoke to his parents that he called them and said that he was leaving town, and no one that I know has seen or heard from him since. I've mostly tried to forget that it all happened. For a while, I'd have panic attacks when I thought about it. I realized that nothing overtly paranormal took place, but my gut tells me that something well out of the ordinary was taking place in that spot. If anyone has any insights, I'd be happy to hear it. And if you need any more details too, I'll answer questions to the best of my ability, and if you don't believe me, I don't blame you. My mother was a single parent of 6, 5 girls and 1 boy, and I was the youngest. We were all opened up to the paranormal at an early age, and this took place in Hollywood, California, in the late 60s. She knew that her kids were all different. She was very supportive, in fact, and never wanted to suppress our separate abilities. She would just tell us not to go around telling people because they would think that our family was crazy. Looking back at life with my mother, I kind of tend to agree on so many levels. Something she said to me that just always stuck with me was that people don't like what they can't understand. At the time, we were renting a house on Alexandria, but the owners wanted to move back in, so we had to move. Mum worked day hours, so the only time she could go looking at rentals was at night. All 6 of us would pile into this big yellow wood panel station wagon with a suicide seat in the back, and off we would go. Most of the time, a door was unlocked, but this was the 60s. All of us armed with flashlights, but we had to be quiet. The scariest times for me was when the doors were open, so me being the smallest, my brother would help me into a window so I could run to the door and open it for them. Now that I'm writing this, I believe that was probably breaking and entering, right? Anyway, if there was a house that made any one of us uncomfortable, she would scratch it off her list and she would move on. It was hard to find a house that fit all of us, especially anything my mother could afford. But one day I came home from school and was surprised to see all of our stuff being moved to the house directly across the street, where an old evil lady with her windows blacked out lived in the back. I finally found my mother and I asked her what was going on. She told me that she got a really good deal that she just couldn't pass up. She said just to stay away from that old lady. It was an old 2-story house with wood floors, 1 bathroom and 3 bedrooms. It used to be 4, but the 4th bedroom, a small portion in the back, was divided to accommodate another renter, that old lady. I must add too that I was young and very small for my age. There was so much room and so much commotion downstairs that my mother was understandably distracted at the time. I asked her why she didn't let me check the house for anything bad first, and she said, "Look, there just wasn't time. It was a good deal and I had to take it. Why don't you go and check it now?" Feeling very important, I went off to investigate. I went into the kitchen, big. I went into the dining room, fancy. And then I started up the stairs. Mum mentioned that there was a bedroom big enough for all of my sisters, a place for all my toys in the hall, and a room for my brother, so I was excited to see this. The staircase was enclosed with a door at the bottom. We went up the steps to a landing where it turned and then proceeded up from there. So I got to the top step when they got me. It just felt like 3 cold hands, quickly, one after the other, grabbed around my throat with so much force. I tried to scream, but the grip was just getting tighter and I thought my vocal cords were being crushed. They started forcing me backward and I felt like I was about to fall, but they just held me there for what seemed like forever in my mind, my toes teetering on the edge of the top step. I couldn't move and it felt like surges of electricity were just running through my body. And then they started guiding me backwards down the steps, fearing at any moment that I was going to be thrown. I saw little spurts of my own breath coming from my nose as they were guiding me down, and I could feel only the edge of the steps graze the tips of my toes while I was trying to grip one of them onto each step. They eventually got me to the landing and up at the wall. It felt like 1,000 weights were pressing against my chest while I was still hardly touching the floor. I was starting to pass out when I heard a voice in my head say to me, "You're strong, you have faith." I saw a white glowing light around me and I said something and then they lessened their grip ever so slightly, but it was enough for me to drop to the floor and run down to my mother. And as soon as I got there, I told her what happened. I said, "Please, Mum, please, can we not live here?" But she said that it was too late. We had nowhere else to go. It wasn't long before everyone else in the family had their own experiences too. We all hated that house, but we had to endure it until we could afford to move again. Now, my brother liked to tinker, and he liked to take things apart and see how they worked, if you will. He took the time to sometimes share that part of his life with me, and I'd like to think that that's where I got my inventor's mind and my ability to fix almost anything. He set up a workshop under the stairs in the basement. I sometimes found some of my electric toys being dissected in there, then put back together on that workbench. One day, I was looking for one of my toys and suspected that I knew right where to look, but I was too scared to go down into the basement alone, so I took my trusted cat Frischka. I thought that he'll protect me. So I started down the stairs with my cat in my arms, and I got almost to the bottom step when the lights went out and the door to the house slammed shut. Scared half to death, I felt for the railing and started to run back up when I saw something. Normally, you could see the moonlight from under the house through the vents to the outside, that is, and something moving was blocking the light out and quickly coming towards me. It almost looked like billowing black smoke from the back of the house. Just then, my loving cat Frischka hissed and clawed me to get away. He jumped from my arms and escaped through one of the grates on the other side. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could with my heart pounding out of my chest. I grabbed the door handle, jiggling it back and forth, thinking that it was stuck. And then I heard a loud, long exhale behind me, followed by the smell of what I can only describe to this day as rotten eggs. The door finally opened, and I just walked out and I slammed and locked it straight behind me. When I told my brother about this, he said that he never felt good down there too, and he always kept the door locked after that. Now, my family was very involved in the church. We cleaned it every Saturday and helped with all the events and variety shows and whatnot. A funny thing, though, was that our family was so big that it felt like we were the variety show in the end. One such day, though, they were all at church just doing something. I don't remember what. I had just arrived home from school and someone, I think one of my sisters, was supposed to be there to greet me. As you walk through the dining room on the left, you walked into the hall and you turn right, and on the left is the boarded-up wall to the tenant's dwelling behind us, with that evil old lady, and just thinking about it gives me chills. And straight ahead was the bathroom. If you turn left into the hall, you see my mum's room that she and I shared together. Next to that, the door to the upstairs, and in the middle, the door to the underhouse. And well, nobody was there, and I wasn't going to stay in that house alone, so I walked into the hall and I sat on the phone bench. For those of you who don't know what that is, it looks like a wooden end table with a padded seat on it, so you can talk on a corded phone. Anyway, earlier, I saw my friend's dad's car parked across the street, so I knew my friend was home, so I figured that I would call him and just hang out there. I could just wait for someone to come home. But as I'm sitting there, I hear crackling coming from upstairs. It must have been one of my siblings, I thought, so I went to the bottom of the stairs and leaned in on one foot. I said, "Who's up there?" And instantly, the crackling stopped. Thinking they didn't hear me, I yelled again, this time calling out a few of my sister's names, but still nothing. So I sat back down on the bench and I waited for them to come down. It was really quiet though, and there wasn't really a sound after that. But just then, as I was sitting there, to the right of me, it sounded like someone was pressing their body against the other side of the boarded up wall, listening. Then a muffled, quiet, evil giggle. It felt off, just really off. The crackling noise started back up again now, coming from the top of the stairs, followed by just an ear-piercing ringing inside my head. Feeling uncomfortable, I picked up the phone, not taking my eyes off that staircase. I dialed my friend's number, and before I could even say hello, I could see it as it turned the corner of the staircase. It was huge. It didn't have a human form, but there were what looked like hundreds of eyes just all over it, and it was pulsating a red amber. The deafening sound of crackling was coming from it, with sparks flashing just all over its form. It was slowly gliding down the stairs, coming towards me, and I then heard more prominent laughter, almost like a cackle coming from behind that wall, and at this, I just ran. I dropped the phone and I ran straight over to my friend's house until someone came home later. Now, please keep in mind too that we only lasted 6 months in this house, so these are all the events that I know of within that time frame, and was confirmed to me by my siblings firsthand. A brief description of where this next event took place though, because it was the second floor. Standing at the top of the stairs to the left, the back of the house was my brother's room. Inside the door to the right was a short wall and the foot of his bed. Alongside of his bed was a window. All of our beds in our houses always face east. Then a desk next to his bed, and then an open space at the back corner near the closet. On the right side of the stairs was all of my sister's room. It was long and really big. and it was set up as follows. As I go into my bathroom, "G'day mates, it's B-Bust." I was 11 at the time and living in a nice suburb area. We had recently moved into this house that my parents had built, and it was our first home, first rented house in a sketchy area, and it was actually a pretty nice neighborhood now. The whole family made friends quickly with lots of neighbors, but especially the ones 3 doors down. They had a daughter my age, and a male by the way, and a daughter 5 years younger, which was the same age as my sister. Our parents got along really well too, and we began hanging out quite a bit for barbecues at their house or parties at our house, etc. Friendships were formed quickly and seemed to be very strong. After a year or so, I started realizing things just weren't what they seemed though. I remember seeing police cars at their house a few times in the evenings, and when I'd ask my parents what was going on, it was always nothing, just checking in on them type answers. I was no genius, but at 11, that obviously still didn't add up. I mean, why didn't the cops ever just check up on us? Anyway, one day I'm at their house playing and hanging out, and the daughter goes across the street to get another mutual friend, which left myself and the father alone in the house. This was really no big deal, as it had actually happened before, but then he approached me and just seemed off. I still don't know what made me feel this way, but I was really uncomfortable and started thinking about leaving, in fact. About 5 minutes later, he tells me that he has something cool to show me. I don't remember exactly what it was, but I think it was something like baseball cards or something, which I was very fond of at the time. I excitedly started following him, and he pulled the attic ladder down and asked me to follow him, which I did without hesitation, at first. But then something happened, and I still can't process what it was, but he was ahead of me on the ladder, and when he looked back to help me into the attic, there was something just really wrong about the whole situation. Something about his eyes, his face, his grin or something. It just wasn't right. It looked evil. I can still see it clear as day and can't recognize exactly what it was that set my alarms off, but whatever it was plenty, because I jumped off that ladder and ran out the door as fast as I could. I sprinted all the way home and was choking back tears when I bursted through my front door. Mum was there when I came through and could see that I was obviously out of sorts and immediately started calming me down. As I came to my senses, I explained what happened, and my mum was obviously concerned with how scared I was, but mostly brushed it off to me being scared, young, and silly and all that. And I kid you not, that same exact night, I was woken up at around 3 a.m. It was my mum sitting on my bed, and as I woke, she just held me like a baby. I remember how she smelled and how tightly she held me, and I remember her tears hitting my cheek. Eventually, I saw out the window to the neighbor's house, and it was surrounded by police and fire trucks. The neighbor's dad had killed himself and his daughter in the attic after a standoff with police. There isn't a doubt in my mind nor my mother's that that would have been me had I made it into that attic. I still get chills thinking about it. So there's this girl that's been stalking me and harassing me since October of 2018. We were in the same class in high school 6 years ago, and she was super shy, never spoke in class, and barely had any friends. I can't remember speaking to her more than once or twice through all of high school. To me, she just didn't even exist. And then suddenly, many months ago, I woke up to a message in my Facebook inbox that read, "F all white people." She's Asian, from what country I don't know, and I thought it was just really strange, so I tried to reply back with, "What's going on?" But she'd blocked my messages. So I decided to just ignore it and go on with my life. About a month had passed, and I woke up to yet another message in my inbox. She had sent me a screenshot of an Instagram account in my name. No posts or followers, just an empty account with my name. I kind of freaked out a little and tried to reply, but yet again she just blocked my messages. I tried to find the account on Instagram, but I couldn't. My name is very uncommon too, so the possibilities that this was another guy's account was very slim. It certainly wasn't my account, that's for sure. I was just really confused and kind of scared that she had created an account with my name and would post things pretending to be me or something. So I contacted one of her high school friends and asked if she could deliver a message for me since I had no way of reaching her. And to my surprise, they weren't friends anymore and hadn't spoken in months. I told my closest friends about what was happening, and they told me that they had received some strange messages too. I was just so confused by this point. This one girl who nobody talked to or had any kind of relationship with was sending pictures of Instagram accounts, weird memes, and just 3-word sentences that made zero sense to me and many of my friends. I tried to think of why she would have done this. Had we treated her badly at some point? But I just couldn't think of anything that we had done. I remember giving her a piece of gum one day, in fact, but that's about as close as any communication happened between us. So I decided in the end that I would just try and ignore her and hope that she wouldn't send me any more messages. But then, around Christmas time, I woke up to my Facebook exploding with notifications and messages. I think I had around a good 100+ notifications. She had been just sharing all of my profile pictures and posts. I'm seriously freaking out at this point and open my messenger. I've received 56 messages that all read, "Kill yourself." I tried to message her again, but surprise, surprise, she had blocked my messages. At this point, I was becoming really angry too. So I clicked on her Facebook profile to block her and get rid of her for good. But before I went to block her, I scrolled down her wall and she'd been sharing literally hundreds of posts and pictures of me, my friends and some other people too that I had no idea who they were. I did some further detective work and found her sister's Facebook profile and decided to send her a message too. I took screenshots of everything that she'd done and sent it to her, asking why she was doing this. She freaked out when she saw what her crazy stalker sister had done. The stalker had deleted her sister on Facebook because of an argument they had around October or something when this all started. So she hadn't seen anything that she'd done. She promised me though that she would talk to her crazy stalker sister and try and make her stop at least. I received a message from the sister a few hours later that she had talked to the stalker and promised that she would stop, and she apologized. I was just happy that this was finally going to be over, and I thanked her. Another few months passed, and we're now in February of 2019. I hadn't received any messages since I talked to her sister, and I had honestly just forgot about everything that had happened. But 2 days ago, I was playing some games with my friends on my PC and talking on Discord. My phone was on the table and I saw it light up once and I'd received a notification. I wouldn't bother to check it before the game was done, but a few seconds after I got another one and then another one, and I could see my phone in the corner of my eye. Notifications just came swarming in. And then I remembered the crazy stalker girl and I just got a really awful feeling in my stomach, praying that this was not her. I stopped playing and picked up my phone, a notification still swarming in, and the stalker was sharing my pictures and posts yet again, and all had a caption like, "Kill yourself" or "I hope you die." I instantly blocked her, and a few minutes later it happened again. Someone with another username was sharing my pictures. I blocked the account instantly again, and she had created at least 10 accounts, and I was desperately trying to block all of them as fast as I could as soon as I saw a notification. I sent her sister a message again and told her that I was going to report this to the police if she wouldn't stop. She told me that she would talk to her again, and angry and confused and kind of scared as well. I went back to the gaming session to talk to my friends about it, and I went to sleep a few hours later. I woke up late the next day, and it was hard to sleep after thinking about all that was happening, but my cousin had received some messages from my crazy stalker as well, and she had told him that I owed her money or something. I kept my calm and told him about everything and said that he should just go with it, and I wanted to see where this was going. She thought that my cousin was actually my father, and he's a lot older than me, so I guess that I could see why she would think that. But they had a long conversation where she claimed that I had both stolen and hacked her phone and lent money away from her or something, and that I was the reason that she lost her scholarship and had to move. She said that I owed her 10k, which later became 50k, and then again she raised the amount to 100k later in the conversation. All of which, of course, was just crazy lies. I'm just so confused as to why she's doing this to me. I have no idea what I've done to her, and in fact, I'm gonna go and report this to the police tomorrow. I'm actually really scared of what she might accuse me of next, or if she's going to show up on my door someday or something. And mind you, all of this is happening 6 years after the last time that I saw her. So a little bit of backstory beforehand. My parents are divorced and I live primarily in Australia, but travel back to see my father, his family, and my extended family in the UK every chance that I can spare. And this story revolves around one of those visits. At the time of the visit, I was 13 years old and due to scheduling conflicts, would be travelling alone without my other sibling. Luckily, most airlines and airports worth their salt offer assistance programs for unaccompanied minors. That program includes an identifying tag, escorts through the airport, help with check-in and priority boarding. I was boarded first, my chaperone said goodbye and handed me off to the flight attendants. So far so good. Nothing of any real significance happened for the first few hours of the flight, but I couldn't help but just feel a little bit uneasy. I kept feeling this sensation like someone was watching me, but every time I glanced around, I couldn't see the source. So I chalked it up to being a little bit nervous about flying alone and just tried to watch some in-flight movies to calm myself down. The next significant event, though, was when I got up to pee. Now, something caught my eye that hadn't before. There was a man about 4 rows back, in a middle aisle seat, who was just staring at me. He wasn't making much attempt to hide the fact that he was looking at me too, and out of shyness, I just kind of looked down and broke our stare and tried to ignore him. As I walked by, I felt almost like he was gesturing me to look at him, as if he wanted to ask me a question. In that moment, I made the decision to ignore him and pretended that I hadn't seen him gesture to me. My mother has always been very safety conscious, and I credit her with giving me a healthy suspicion of strangers. She made it very clear that while I was traveling alone, I didn't have to answer to any other adults but my chaperones, and that if someone tried to talk to me or made me do something for them, that I had permission to ignore them or report them to the airport staff. And so, that's what I did. I walked past him, went to the bathroom, and walked back to my seat with my head down. I can't verify whether or not he kept trying to get my attention because I was a little freaked out and just kind of looked at the back. And all I can say is that my creepy, you're being watched sensors kept on tingling as the flight went on. These bad feelings all came to a head during the sleeping hours of the flight though. For those who haven't travelled international long hauls, the sleeping hours are for people to sleep by stimulating nighttime in the plane. This basically means no trolley service, dim lights, and all the airline screens are shut off. I was really groggy and sleep-deprived at the time, and I probably should have tried to get some rest, but I just couldn't get comfortable and was just trying to ride out my time watching movies. And this is when he approached me. He put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed, and then he said something that I didn't hear with my headphones on, so I removed them and turned to give him my groggy but full attention. I said, "Sorry," and he said, "Will you come to the back of the plane with me, please?" Utterly confused by this question, I said, "Have I done something?" And he said, "No, I would just like for you to come to the back of the plane with me." He crouched down to be at eye level with me at this point, glancing back to the end of the plane, which is dark, behind a curtain, and the only bathroom is vacant. I just kind of looked at him. He said, "I have money," and pulls out a wallet and shows me a wad of cash, "if you'd like some." "I just want to talk to you at the back of the plane," he said. "It'll just be for a moment." Obviously, being young, and mind you, looking very young, I'm just very confused as to what to do when this is happening. Looking back, I remember feeling annoyed, less afraid of danger, and just more irritated at being asked to stop watching a movie and do something. Due to my tired state, it just wasn't connecting that I might actually be in danger here. I was just being asked to talk to this guy about something random. I wondered if he might have convinced me with a little more prodding too, but luckily, he didn't get any further, because a woman behind me, who I realized later was listening in for the entire conversation, pulled down her eye mask, leant over between the seat gap, and said, "She isn't interested. You need to return to your seat right now, or I'll call the flight attendant." And I've never seen a man move so fast. He tucked his wallet away and scurried back to his seat, slid on his eye mask and rotated away from us so that we wouldn't see his face. She turns her attention to me and says, "If he comes back over to you, wake me up or call for the flight attendant, okay? If you need to use the bathroom, use the one in the center of the plane because it's more well lit." And she reaches through and rests a hand on my shoulder. I give a thank you and she leans back into her seat but keeps her eye mask off, shooting looks into the man's direction. Near the last few hours of the flight, I didn't feel uneasy or like I was being watched anymore. The woman who was traveling with her 2 kids keeps leaning in and asking me questions about where I'm going, who's picking me up from the airport, etc., etc. When she discovers that I'm meeting extended family at the terminal, her face clears and she offers to walk out with me to the baggage claim. We land, get off the plane, and when I saw my father in the arrivals lounge, I wave her a fond goodbye, say thank you, and I walk off. As for the guy, I have no idea what happened. The encounter was just so bizarre and kind of forthright and short that I might have just discarded it from my memory immediately. Looking back though, I always feel apprehension and dread as to what his intentions exactly were. I have some theories and they probably line up with your theory too, but I'm just glad that I didn't get put into a position to find out. So, to start this off, this all happened at a decommissioned power plant. Now, on this property, there was a cemetery that the company had bought with the property. They were digging up graves and transporting them out at the time, and we had to have 2 security at the main gate and 2 at the cemetery while they were digging up the bodies and bringing them out. They did this at night because of the heavy truck traffic on the road leading out of the main gate during the day. Now, 2 had to be at the gate because we had to check off names and make sure all bodies were accounted for and none were missing. The other 2 guards had to be at the cemetery because of grave robbers who, if the coffins were left unattended, would crack them open and steal everything except the body, and also meth heads getting in there to get high. And so we always had 2 guards at all times there. Our company finally broke down and got us a shotgun that week after one of our guards was shot by a meth head. He did survive, by the way, in one of the outlying buildings. But everyone carried some sort of firearm after the guard was shot. For instance, everyone carried handguns except the LT, who kept an AR on him out of the cemetery. Now, this was a pretty normal night. I was in the shack watching Stargate when the radio starts going off with people from the dig site freaking out. Our response was, "What the hell is going on out there?" And they said that someone was going into the facility. So the LT and the guard with him followed and demanded that we followed, and so I grabbed our 12 gauge and we bolted in. They described the person as a tall woman with short hair walking in. This wasn't totally unusual because there was a neighborhood around where teens would get in and hook up. Gross, I know, but something just set everyone in the dig site into a panic. We hooked up the respirators so that we could go in. We had to have them due to asbestos, and entered, taking every step with a grain of salt because none of us wanted to get shot. We were about 4 floors up when we see it, and it's going up the stairs. I was about to confront her when the other main gate guard grabbed my shoulder and pulled me back, and said, "Dude, look at her." I didn't think anything about it until I looked back and the person was gone, presumably up the stairs. The LT was shaking and I thought that he was going to have a heart attack, and everyone was just ghost white. The main gate guard looks at me and says, "Bro, she wasn't moving her legs." And it was at this point that the LT made us pull out and go back to the shack. He called the digging company and told them to get the hell out here now, and we tried to gather our thoughts before the company got on the radio. And someone said that, "Guys, she's on the roof." We ran out immediately and saw that there was a woman on the far side of the roof, the side without a roof access area, mind you. And we all looked at each other, and after that, I made the decision that it was time to quit. This was one of the most terrifying security jobs that I'd ever worked, and at this point, I was done. The two other guards did the same, and we took off our shirts, threw them in the shack, and we just left that night. I found out later too from one of the guys that the LT quit after turning in the camera footage of the incident and his personal body camera footage to corporate the next morning. We had a whole host of stuff that happened there over the short time that I'd worked there, but most of it was just small gates opening on their own, or knocks on doors and windows, some handprints on cars, I think, a truck being pushed into a ditch, and a whole load of stuff like that. But this was different, because when I saw her on the roof, she didn't have any legs. In November, my two roommates, John and Amber, and I moved into a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom apartment located in Sacramento. It really isn't the greatest area, and it's right next to the railroad tracks, but the rent is decent. From the moment that we stepped foot onto the property, though, something just felt very wrong with this place. I brushed it off, though, as the moving started, because I was already in a bad enough mood having to haul everything up the damn stairs to the apartment. So, the first night, I didn't have my bed with me. There's a long story that goes with that, but I won't get into it. Although, the 3-inch memory foam topper that I had, it arrived the day before move-in, so I had something to sleep on instead of just bare carpet. It took me a minute to get comfortable, but I was so wiped out from moving that I pretty much passed out instantly just before 11 p.m. I slept for maybe 2 hours before I began to just feel really uncomfortable. I tossed and turned around a lot before turning around to face the right wall in my room, and when I opened my eyes, I shot back on the topper, seeing just a pale face of a woman. There wasn't a figure around it, just a face looking at me with a strange smile. But once I sat up to grab my phone for more light, there was nothing there anymore. And I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched the rest of the night. And nothing else happened for about 2 weeks. Another night, in the beginning of December, I had stayed up rather late hanging out with John and Amber. We'd been having a fun night just playing Cards Against Humanity, and it was about 1 in the morning at this point when we all finally decided to head to bed, and I climbed into mine. I should also mention that we have 3 animals that live in the house. 4 now, but the 4th wasn't there when this happened. John and Amber have a cat named Lego, and I have a small Chihuahua mixed dog named Jake and a fat jerk of a cat named Jedi. I normally have to sleep with my door cracked open, otherwise Jedi will howl about wanting in or out. He likes to come and go as he pleases. Now that it's noted too, the bathroom area is right outside my door. It leads to the sink and counter with a large mirror on the wall, and around the corner is the door to the toilet and shower. We have a nightlight on the wall by the outside sink area, just so that we can find our way to the bathroom during our mid-sleep bathroom calls and whatnot. Anyway, I was exhausted, and I felt myself just melting into my bed once again, enjoying the comfort. But for some reason, I just couldn't manage to fall asleep right away, though. I can't explain it, but something just felt really off. I got the feeling of just being watched again. About 2 hours passed by of me tossing and turning, trying to get myself to fall asleep, and I was laying on my back when I noticed a black shadow emerge from the bathroom, moving out to the mirrored sink area. My door was over halfway open, so I could see it clearly now too. Just a humanoid shadow that was standing in the bathroom area. And now, it seemed like it was looking at me. But there were no eyes, though, or any other noticeable features. But before I could say anything, the figure just charged at me in my bed, running so hard and fast at the foot of the bed that I thought it was going to crash into it. So I jolted back in shock and I blinked just for a second, and when I opened my eyes and looked around, there was nothing there in my room. I laid back down hoping that it was all just in my head, but when I saw it in the bathroom area again, it seemed a bit more bulky and tall, and it just loomed there in the hallway. It actually charged at me once again as I was in my bed, but this time coming all the way up to the side of my bed into my face before it just disappeared right before my eyes. I felt the rush of air hit me as well as I was trying to scramble to the other side of my bed. Looking up, it was gone, and to this day, I still can't explain what happened. I looked in my closet and under my bed, and by this point I'd made some noise screaming, so my friends were awake, and we just couldn't find anything. And so I just closed my door before turning on my TV in my room for some light, and I didn't sleep at all that night. So I'm currently living with my grandparents in a really old house that was originally two separate houses belonging to two brothers. After the two brothers died, the houses were joined together and sold as one. I actually grew up in this house and have had a ton of experiences in it, both when I was a young child and now even as an adult. For now though, I just wanted to share a short one that happened pretty recently. So, my room is upstairs and my desk is against the wall that has an attic that only gets open probably once every 10 years, if that. I was sitting at my desk playing some Grand Theft Auto with a few friends, and my phone jumped off the desk and onto the floor. It wasn't charging, so I know that I didn't just hit the cable and drag it down or anything, and this actually happens quite a bit, so it didn't scare me too much. Again, I grew up here and I've had far scarier things happen. But nevertheless, I like to share everything paranormal that happens with my grandmother, so I took off my wireless headset and just set it on the desk while I went downstairs to talk to my grandmother. I come back up a few minutes later, throw my headset back on, and I start talking with my friends. And nobody responds. So I sent a message to see what was going on. A moment later, I can hear everyone talking again, and they had muted me while I was gone. They kept asking me too if I was screwing with them, and I told them about the phone and also let them know that I was just going downstairs for a minute and initially just thought that this was what they were referring to. Someone else assures all the others, though, that I was just messing with them, and I ask what they're talking about, and they tell me that they muted me because someone was breathing heavily into the microphone while I was downstairs. They went through the process of muting each person to see if it was someone else trying to screw with everyone, but it was only coming from me. My friends also said that it lasted at least 2 minutes or so and was a pretty deep and heavy breathing. But when they found out that it wasn't really me, most of them just got offline for the night as they were genuinely freaked out by it. At first, I honestly thought that I was the one getting pranked, but I've asked several times since then, and everyone in the party swears up and down that it really happened. And they actually don't like it when I bring it up, too. This happened to me about 6 months ago now, I think. I'm originally from a town in the north of the UK, but I was living in a different part of the country at the time for university. I was just going into my second year, so I'd moved from student accommodation, like halls, to a house share with 4 other girls. We were in a pretty nice house on a small dead-end street, and all the shops and the bars were at the end of the street. I was in a bedroom that was on the bottom floor and at the front of the house. It had originally been a living room, but had been changed into a bedroom for student housing. Because it used to be a living room, the window was a huge bay window that took up the entire length of the front wall. The house had a big driveway and a front garden, both with fences around, and this meant that you couldn't walk past the front of the house without intending to be there, and you would have to walk up the driveway. So, I'd been living in this house for about 2 weeks, I think, when this happened. On this particular night, there was only 2 of us in, as our other 3 roommates had gone home for the weekend. The other girl that was in had a second-floor bedroom, also on the front of the house. It was around 2 a.m. and I was sat in bed just watching Netflix. I didn't usually stay up this late, but I was talking to a new boy at the time, and I would often stay up late just to talk to him. Sad, I know, but new relationships are exciting, right? Anyway, I remember wanting to go to sleep at about 12:30 and decided to stay up for a bit longer to talk to him, and now I'm really glad that I did. At the time, I was quite naive and didn't really think much about the dangers of not locking doors and leaving windows open. I grew up in a really nice area where we didn't even really have to lock our doors, and so I still wasn't out of this mindset. But this experience has definitely changed that, though. Because of this, I had one of my windows slightly open and my curtains were open too. The curtains didn't matter too much because the way the house was built, the garden and the trees were right in front of my window, meaning that no one could see in unless they stood directly in front of it. Being naive, though, I didn't think that there was a possibility that anyone would try to. So I was halfway laying down and half sitting up in bed with my laptop in front of me. I didn't have my laptop on too high a volume, as although she was upstairs, there was another girl in the house and I wanted to be respectful. When all of a sudden I saw a shadow go past my window, like a person walking past. I froze immediately as, like I mentioned earlier, there was no way that someone could just walk past unless they walked down my driveway and were specifically coming into my house. I thought, though, that maybe someone had walked down the wrong driveway or was possibly cutting through and was going to jump the fence to another house or something. But something just didn't sit right about this at all. So I left my laptop running and I just looked at the window for a second. I couldn't see out the window at all since it was so dark outside, but I could make out shadows on the wall just next to it. For a second, there was nothing, and then a shadow of a man went past, and then the shadow of another man about 2 seconds afterwards. And it was at this point that I knew something was very wrong, and I shut my laptop immediately in the hope that if they looked in the window, they wouldn't see me. A bit of time went past, maybe like a minute or two, and I just sat in the pitch black waiting to see if I saw anything else. After this bit of time went by, another shadow of a man went past my window in the opposite direction. It was as if they both walked in front of my window and to the back of the house, but only one came back. And I was certain at this point that they were doing something wrong, but for some reason I couldn't move. My brain was trying to process a million things at once, and I was so scared that I think I just froze. I felt like if I moved that they would know that I was there, and I had no idea whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. For all I knew, they could have been hoping for a young, 19-year-old girl to be inside, and I didn't want to run the risk of letting them know that I was there. I was also completely naked under my covers, and it definitely crossed my mind that if I got up and they could see in the window that they may see me naked. After what felt like an eternity, though, of just sitting and waiting, I heard a loud bang on my window. It sounded like someone had hit something, like a rock off the window with force or something. I assumed that they were trying to break the window and panicked hugely, but still couldn't move. I can't explain what was going through my mind, but it was almost like I was waiting for a completely definitive thing to happen before I got up, as if I was being overdramatic or something. But after the loud noise, I would say that maybe 30 seconds went past, and then all of a sudden, my curtains started moving, and I see a hand come around the side of them to get them out of the way. They were big curtains, and my openable windows were on either side of the big window, meaning that you were slightly blocked, even by the open curtains. I then look over to the curtains, and I see a figure of a man climbing through my window, and he was halfway through my window with the top half of his body inside my room. And this is when my mind finally decided that this was a fight or flight situation, and I shut up and I ran towards my door on the other side of the room. It was locked, so I had to fumble for the key, turn it, and then open the door and run, all the while making a huge amount of noise. I ran up the stairs and knocked on my roommate's door, still completely naked, I should add, so the image that she must have got when she opened a door is pretty amusing to think about. But anyway, she opened the door almost immediately, which I found odd for it being 2 a.m, but I was thankful none the least. I told her what had happened, and we locked the door and started panicking. Neither of us knew what to do, as we had never been in a situation like this before. Being stupid and young, I decided to ring my mum. completely not helpful to the situation, but I wasn't thinking straight, and she told me to ring the police immediately, obviously too. So we rang the police, and because we didn't know if the men were in the house or not, they arrived within 2 minutes, as it may have been an active burglary. I had left my laptop and all my possessions in my room, mind you, other than my phone, because it happened to be in my hand when I ran. So if they were in my room, they would have had plenty to take. The police arrived, and we threw down the keys from the top window to them so they could let themselves in. They searched the whole house, top to bottom, and they didn't find anyone. I went down, and they reassured us that it was safe and checked my room and nothing had been taken. I knew for sure then, though, that they mustn't have even come into my room at all, as my laptop was clear as day on my bed, and it would have been the first thing that they should have taken if they had seen it. But the police agreed that I must have scared them off by getting up, as they mustn't have been expecting anyone to be in. They must have thought that the room was a living room, as it made sense for it to have been, and would have been expecting to rob the house while everyone was asleep upstairs. I had this crazy thought process through all of this, where I started wondering if I had seen what I had thought that I had seen, and started doubting myself and wondering if I was just going insane. But when I went down to check my room, my window had been completely opened to its fullest extent too. And this just confirmed that what I had seen was completely real. I learned a valuable lesson about leaving windows open that day, for sure. But while the police were there, they actually got radioed about another attempted robbery just a couple of streets along from mine, and they suspected that it was the same 2 men. Nothing ever came back about that though, so they mustn't have caught them, unfortunately. But they told us that if they did catch anybody engaging in similar crime, that they would get back in touch, but to this day, they still haven't. So either they've been caught and not connected to my case, or they haven't been caught at all. CSI came the next day and actually managed to get a fingerprint from my window, but they said that the person must have been sweating or something, as the fingerprint was too smudged to get anything from. I am so glad that I decided to stay up later, because if I hadn't been awake for this, they would have physically been in my room by the time that I noticed that they were there, or they noticed me. But the thought of waking up to 2 men in my room is just terrifying, and I'm not sure what they would have done if they had gotten to the room before realizing, as there was no easy escape from them for me. They would have had to have climbed out the tiny window again, or unlocked my bedroom door and then the front door to get out. But this might have led to a violent and nasty situation if they had realized that they were stuck in a room with an eyewitness, and it doesn't even bear thinking about. Also, my roommate told me after the police left that she actually woke up for some reason about 5 minutes before I came flying up the stairs, and she said that she heard the loud bang on my window when she was already awake. But she started to get a bad feeling after that, and had waited for a bit, sitting on the end of her bed next to the door just in case I came running up. It's pretty interesting too that she actually woke up during this, as the men were not loud at any point other than when they hit the window. And maybe it says a lot about the body's ability to detect danger. I, unfortunately, ended up not being able to sleep in that room after that without having all the lights on, and soon after decided to move back home for university because I felt just so uneasy at living down there and whatnot. In the end, I think I was pretty lucky, and it was a bit of a narrow escape. So last August, we began relocating to another city because my fiancé was offered a position at a company that he wanted since he graduated, and I was okay with it because I'm a private tutor at a small institute, and I was lucky to be able to transfer to their other branch, which happens to be in this current city. After we made sure everything could work smoothly, my fiancé started moving us in August, as I was able to do my transfer in September, so I had to wait. Although, because my schedule is usually more flexible in the summer, we did make a couple of rounds together. So he found a house that was new, a little out of town, but on the cheaper side nevertheless, and he's helping me pay my student fiancé started moving us in August, as I was able to do my transfer in September, so I had to wait. Although, because my schedule is usually more flexible in the summer, we did make a couple of rounds together. So he found a house that was new, a little out of town, but on the cheaper side nevertheless. And he's helping me pay my student loan, so although we earned a good amount, we have to save most of it for that, and we've decided at this point that we would get married once we were both debt-free, and he had some credit card debt that we're also working through. Now, my fiancé mentioned the first time that he began moving things that the house had some problems with electricity and he wasn't sure what it was, but they just stopped working out of nowhere. I told him to contact the realtor to complain, as we were told the house was perfectly ready to move in, and excuse my language, but although the rent was cheap, we did pay a buttload during the whole process of moving and deposit and whatnot, so I didn't think it was fair that we had to deal with this. We never did talk about it again. He did call the realtor, and someone went and checked, I guess. I don't know the specifics, I just know that it wasn't a problem again. And then I fully moved in September, started my new job, and everything was good. On the 28th of December, we were going to go drive to the old city to go to my fiancé's sister's birthday that was the next day and stay for the weekend. Unfortunately, though, I had to stay until late Friday at work and told my fiancé that I'd just take the train in the morning and he should go. So I came home late that night, maybe 11 or 12, I'm not too sure. All the lights were on, TVs were on, and my fiancé's desktop computer was also turned on. It's not a big house, but it does have many rooms, so someone would have to have intentionally turned them all on one by one. You can't just forget to turn them off too, so I texted my fiancé to ask, and he told me that he didn't do it. It could be a problem with the electricity again, since the door was locked and there was no sign of anyone entering too. I just let it go. Also, we have an alarm system, not a motion detector, but it's on the windows and the doors. If they open after the alarm is on, they go off, so I just directly went to bed, put my phone on the charge next to me, and put like 20 different alarms to make sure that I would wake up, and even put the ringer on the loud set. So the next day, I wake up, turn to check my phone, and it's not next to me. I honestly had a small heart attack, to say the least, and I got up, started looking around, and it wasn't anywhere. We don't have a landline, so I don't know what to do at this point, and I ran to my laptop to check the time, and it was around 11 a.m. And while I was extremely anxious and upset that I missed the train and the birthday, I was more anxious that my phone was missing. I messaged my fiancé on Facebook and told him what happened, and he wasn't angry, he was just annoyed, and I was almost certain that he thought that I was making up an excuse. I then asked him to call my phone so that I could find it, and he did, and there was nothing, no noise. He said that I must have it on silent or something, which I never ever put my phone on silent, when he's in another city especially, because I want him to be able to reach me at all times in case of the worst. So I started to make myself believe that maybe I got up at night or something and put my phone somewhere else, and then it just ran out of battery. But then how come my fiancé can call it? Maybe I really did put it on silent after all. My fiancé told me that I could skip this weekend as I was tired and clearly not in my right mind. That night I ordered some takeout, and my fiancé is a vegetarian, so I don't get to binge on junk food, burgers and stuff much when he's around. The order came and I started watching Netflix on TV. I went to the kitchen to get a napkin, came back, and I suddenly heard my ringtone. I stopped everything to look around, and my phone came out of a takeout McDonald's bag. And I swear at that point that I began sweating, and I just felt extremely uneasy. Also, the phone was at 100% battery, and no notifications, no calls from my fiancé, nothing, just absolutely nothing. I freaked out and called my fiancé again, in which he kind of got annoyed with me again and told me to calm down and get some rest. After that, though, I decided to call my sister, which she didn't answer. And I seriously started freaking out and turned on all the lights and decided to sleep in the living room if I had to sleep at all. I knew at that point that something was going on. I spoke to my sister the next day, though, and she said all the things my fiancé said. After this, nothing happened for about 2 months as well. My birthday's in November, but I had to work that day unfortunately, so my fiancée decided to come home early than me and cook for me. Now, if you're also over 25, then you know that birthdays are just like any other normal day. You have to work, and so I was absolutely thrilled that I didn't have to get dressed and drag myself out. I came home, we ate, we did the naughty, and my fiancé fell asleep. And then I heard his phone ringing in the kitchen. It was quite late, so I thought it must have been important, and so I went to fetch it. But when I went there, the phone wasn't there. And when I entered the kitchen, the noise stopped, and the fridge doors were open, like wide open. But the doors of our fridge automatically close unless you open them to the max and put this stopper thing in that the fridge has. So it was put on that. And also, it starts making this stupid beeping noise after you leave it open for too long, and it wasn't on, so that meant that it was just opened. I freak out again, call for my fiancé. He ran inside probably thinking that someone's about to murder me, and I told him what happened, and he said that my phone is on silent and that it's on charge next to me. You must be dreaming, and you must have forgotten to put it on. You're tired and whatnot. I'm a logical person, mind you, and the logic that he was saying was right, so I accepted it and I just tried to move on. And besides the TV turning on by itself sometimes, there was really nothing again. Which at that point, my fiancé had decided the problem must have been the wiring with the TV, as the electricity was fine. So, I accepted it again. I mean, it is the logical thing to believe, right? 2 days ago, I came home from work early as I had nothing after lunch. I decided to clean a little, maybe cook some stuff for the week and whatnot. But at first I wanted a warm bath because I worked my legs slightly too hard at the gym, so it was pretty sore. So I prepped my things, even put my laptop on to catch up on my shows, nice coffee and whatever else. I filled the tub with hot water, which is important. It was quite hot, and I had to slowly get in to not burn myself, but that's how I enjoy it. Just when I was about to start my pampering too, I heard the door. I had some Amazon orders that I was expecting, so I got up, put on a robe, signed for the packages, and got back. It was a maximum of about 3 minutes, I'd say. But when I got back, the water was ice cold. Not just cold, I mean like freezing cold. The type of cold that actually burns your skin. And everything else was the same but the water. And because I didn't expect that, I just put my leg in directly, and with the shock I slipped and fell in the tub, and now I have a small bruise on my butt. I didn't tell my fiancé about this though, because I know that he'll just try to justify it with saying that I'm tired again. I just told him that I fell, but I swear to you that the water, it was hot. It was so hot that I left the door open in the bathroom and cracked the window to stop it from getting extra